Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you all had an enjoyable lunch and even better conversation. I saw a lot of mingling going on, so it's always what we strive for at such events. Our next session is focused on hearing from our keynote speaker, whom I'm pleased to introduce, the Honorable Rick Spinrad. Dr. Spinrad is the Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere and Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. In this role, he is responsible for the strategic direction and oversight, including developing NOAA's portfolio of products and services to address the climate crisis, enhancing environmental sustainability, fostering economic development, and creating a more just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive NOAA workforce. As he is quick to point out, this is Dr. Spinrad's third tour with NOAA, having been previously served as NOAA's chief scientist under President Barack Obama from 2014 to 2016, and also as the lead of both NOAA's National Ocean Service and the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research from 2003 to 2010, where he co-led the White House committee that developed the nation's first set of ocean research priorities and oversaw the revamping of NOAA's research enterprise, including the development of the agency's scientific integrity policy. In between his time serving in NOAA, Dr. Spinrad served as a professor of oceanography and senior advisor to the vice president of research at Oregon State University, as well as the vice president for research at OSU from 2010 to 2014. Prior to initially joining NOAA, Dr. Spinrad held leadership positions at the U.S. Office of Naval Research and with the Oceanographer of the Navy, where he was awarded the Distinguished in Civilian Service Award, which is the highest award given by the U.S. Navy to a civilian. He's held faculty appointments at OSU, the U.S. Naval Academy, and George Mason University. He served as the executive director at the Consortium for Oceanographic Research and Education, a predecessor to the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, was president of CTEC Incorporated, and worked as a research scientist at OSU and the Big O Laboratory for Ocean Sciences. Clearly, Dr. Spinrad has a distinguished and diverse background spanning government, academia, industry, and the nonprofit sectors. Through it all, he has been a champion for ocean science and technology, and I have been honored to work with him in all of his stints in NOAA. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Spinrad to the stage.
Thank you, Alan. That was really nice. I appreciate that. What a treat to be here today. I've had the honor to be at any number of these ocean exploration fora over the years. And this one was, when I got the invitation to come speak, was a real treat for me because, one, I know a lot of folks in this community, but even more importantly, I don't know a lot of folks in the community. I've been watching the growth in the ocean exploration community for a few years. Two, if you had asked me if I would be here in the capacity as NOAA administrator a few years ago, I would have asked, what are you drinking or smoking? I never expected to be in this position. And I'll share with you just a little bit of an insight, and that is, or perspective, I should say. About a year ago now, I got a call from the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo. Mine was one of several names on a list being considered for the role of Undersecretary and NOAA Administrator. And I looked at the other names, and you all saw them. They were in the Washington Post. They were elsewhere. A number of much more brilliant, much more technically savvy folks than I. When I spoke with the secretary, I said to her, I told her that. I thought, you've got an extraordinary set of folks to consider, myself not necessarily included in that list from a technical and scientific perspective. But what I thought I could bring to the table was that I knew the agency. I knew the people. I knew where the knobs and dials were. I knew where the skeletons were buried. I knew the agency well enough that I said, I thought I could hit the ground running and do the things that needed to be done pretty quickly. And it turns out that was the ticket. That's what Secretary Raimondo was looking for. I'm just going to go ahead and put this first slide up so you don't have to look at me, but you can look at a couple of interesting things as I get going. And sure enough, within the first week on the job, the question I was asked was, how do we want to frame the 2023 budget? And so that's the sort of thing, I don't care how many Civics 101 lessons you've had in high school or college, until you've lived in DC and understand the budget process, it is the most arcane strange process in the world. But for me, I understood exactly what it was. And so one of the early tests of fire, if you will, that I had was to start to build the 2023 budget. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Let me just start, though, by thanking a number of folks. And obviously, I want to thank all the organizers of the forum. Thank you, Alan, for that very kind introduction. I also want to make sure that there are a few folks that I call out for a few reasons, not the least of which is my good friend Craig McLean, who has been a strong player in the ocean exploration world, ran the NOAA Ocean Exploration Program for a number of years. Craig is actually retiring this week. He was in a meeting with me. I'm going to get every last drop of juice out of the guy before he leaves. This is his last week. He'll be out. I thought I saw that Janine Fisher was here. Janine has been holding up. Thank you, Janine, holding the fort up as we've been building the program, looking for a new director. And of course, I'm delighted to welcome Jeremy Wyrick back. Where's Jeremy? You were here earlier. I saw you. Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy's, of course, served as a NOAA Corps officer, knows the program extraordinarily well, has also served on the Hill and a number of other places. So welcome to Jeremy. I should also point out, every time I talk to an ocean exploration crowd, I think about what was going on. Yeah, it was about 20, it was a little more than 20 years ago. It's about 25 years ago. I was working for Admiral Jim Watkins at CORE, Consortium for Ocean Research and Education. And in walked Craig McLean, Dan Bosta, and Ted Lillestolen. Some of you in the audience will remember that treacherous trio. And they were trying to pitch, they knew better than to try to pitch Admiral Watkins, and they figured they'd try to pitch me on this concept of ocean exploration. They made a good pitch. It was a really good story. We bought in, if you will, at CORE at that point and said, yeah, how can we help? And I would like to think that we helped a little bit back then, but we've seen the program grow extraordinarily. And it's with that as a framework that I want to share with you some overall perspectives about NOAA and what we're trying to do at NOAA, and then also share with you some more specifics on ocean exploration. So what I'd like to do is push the envelope a little bit in this talk and give you a sense of what we might be doing differently. And in this first slide here, you see the triad, as I call it, the three main areas of emphasis that we are building at NOAA. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about each of them. But the thing that I want you to see as you read through this slide is nowhere does it say the National Ocean Service will do this, the Fisheries Service will do that, the Weather Service will do something else. This is the one NOAA message. These are the things that we are emphasizing. Well, let me start in walking through these by talking about the issue of equity. For us at NOAA, equity is a concept that we are embedding throughout everything that we do. And I talk about equity as a two-way lens. And what I mean by that is we're looking at equity as addressing the needs of vulnerable, unserved or unserved communities, but not just simply addressing the needs, actually co-developing the products and services with these communities. And these communities can mean anything from socioeconomic groups to geographically distributed groups to language groups. I mean, think about what we do to support fisheries in the Gulf of Mexico, for example. Are we doing enough to make sure those products are delivered in the languages that are most appropriate? Guess what? One of those languages is Vietnamese. Are we building our products and services for the fisheries community in the Gulf of Mexico with an eye towards supporting the very large Vietnamese fishing community? Just an example of the kinds of co-development concerns we've got with equity. The other part of this is equity with the lens turned inward. Too much of NOAA looks like me. When I joined NOAA, it was predominantly a white male agency. It's changing. When I was last at NOAA, the answer was, yes, this is a generational thing, and over a few generations, it will change. Not satisfactory. We need to be much more aggressive about changing the profile of NOAA. Why? Simply stated, any publicly resourced organization which is not representative of the public it is serving will not survive. So it's incumbent on us to look like America. So I've taken it upon myself to make that push, even in just the political team that I've been able to build. And oh, by the way, I think this is the best political team that we've got in the last 20 years at NOAA. I can't speak before that. That team is 85% women, 50% people of color by design. So there are things we can do. There's things I'm trying to do in my leadership role to try to change the way NOAA looks, to try to be more representative of the communities that we are serving. You saw the other priority I had was NOAA Climate and Services. Let me be unequivocal about that. NOAA needs to be recognized as the federal authoritative source for climate products and services in a mission agnostic manner. Think about that terminology, that phrasing. Right now, we don't have that. We do have it for weather. You want an authoritative weather product? Go to National Weather Service. We have it for fisheries. You want an authoritative stock assessment? You might disagree with it, but it is written into law that the National Marine Fisheries Service is that authoritative source for stock assessments. We don't have that for climate. And oh, by the way, not only should NOAA serve in that capacity, we've already demonstrated the ability to provide that sort of capability for transportation, energy, commerce, offshore energy development, agriculture. That's the mission agnostic part. So we're working hard to try to position the agency in that capacity, just as we have done for fisheries and for weather. Then we get to this third priority. The new blue economy. There's a lot of confusion about the new blue economy in the sense that there are people who say the new blue economy is green shipping, or the new blue economy is next generation fishing. That's not what the new blue economy is here. What the new blue economy is the knowledge-based economy. The economy made possible by the capability that we now have to collect not only data, but information and knowledge about the ocean and commercialize that in an environmentally sustainable manner. So I think about the kinds of things that our colleagues at Mbari, for example, have done with video imagery, creating an opportunity for new educational products, creating commercial opportunities for people to learn how to develop new capabilities for measuring and monitoring the ocean. There's an interesting intersection of ocean sciences and business. In fact, there's some schools, very progressive universities around the country that started giving blue MBAs. I think URI was one of the first to do that. And I don't call that out because my boss is from Rhode Island. It really was the first place that did that. This concept of the new blue economy is really about emerging capabilities, but it's also part and parcel of the ocean exploration agenda. Why have ocean exploration? We know all the reasons. This group in this audience has been discussing this for years and years. I'm adding another element. I believe the new blue economy is another angle that we can build into the ocean exploration agenda. And it's not just me that believes that. Our Ocean Exploration Advisory Board that advises our program called that out in a letter just a couple of weeks ago when they recognized data as, quote, a strategic asset. So we have the advice of our most senior, most knowledgeable advisory board. We have the opportunity to build this out. We sit, guess what, in the Department of Commerce. Bad on us if we're not taking best advantage of that. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's about innovation and pushing the envelope. Now, this room is full of innovation. And over the course of the next couple of days, there are going to be some extraordinary discussions about innovation of a wide variety of types. I would say my job as NOAA administrator is not quite to get out of the way, but to be there to make this happen, to facilitate innovation in the best way I can. And I can tell you one of the ways I'm trying to do that is by redefining the risk tolerance of the agency. Many of you have heard me talk about my early career when I worked at the Office of Naval Research, where I was not only allowed to take risk, I was expected to take risk, and I was expected to fail in some of my investments. The reason I could do that, the reason why I could invest in high risk, high payoff research activities is because I knew there was someone at the top who was willing to defend my right to do that. This concept has been put forward over the years. If you've never read Rising Above a Gathering Storm, which was led by a brilliant man named Norm Augustine out of the National Academy of Sciences, and then there was a follow-on report, you'll see one of their recommendations was that federal agencies ought to spend 8% of their research budget on high risk, high payoff. I asked Norm Augustine one day, why was it 8%? He said, well, half the committee wanted 5, half wanted 10. So we cut it off in the middle and rounded up. Nothing more complicated than that. The concept, though, was to be able to show that we're reaching forward. So my question is, how do we do that within the context of ocean exploration? There's a number of ways. Autonomy needs a push. There are people in this room, many of my friends, colleagues I've worked with who are doing extraordinary things with uncrewed systems. Some of those are working out, some are not. Are we in the federal government doing enough to foster that sort of high risk, high payoff effort? Do we have a risk tolerant environment in the federal agency? You know, one of the really big projects that I'm involved with right now that I'm pushing hard is the replacement of all 120 of our Doppler radar systems in the United States, 120 of them. For those of you who are into this sort of thing, that radar system, and it's known as WSR 88D, Weather Service Radar 88D. You know where the 88 comes from? That's the year they were first installed. US Navy started using phased array radar about 30 years ago, demonstrated it's got a faster response and can be more accurate for detecting weather events. Maybe we should think about swapping out our WSR 88Ds with phased array radar. That's a high risk, but high payoff kind of effort. You can mitigate the risk, but there's some examples there of the kinds of things that we can do. What about the future of our fleet? We could talk about where Oceanus Explorer will go in the future. I'm starting to look at what is the art of the possible in terms of ocean exploration and what the fleet looks like. The future of our fleet writ large. Is our fleet one that we should consider moving to a net zero domain? What geography should we be looking at? What partnerships should we be developing? I was fortunate last week to be in London with a couple of my heroes, Don Walsh, Victor Vescovo, Patrick Leahy, and had a great discussion with Victor, who may even be on this call, I don't know, about how we do different kinds of partnerships. That's where our Ocean Exploration Advisory Board, again, can help us, can push us into new approaches. Can we take new communities and engage with them? I've started a dialogue with the American Medical Association, the National Association of Realtors, the manufacturing associations. How do we take the concepts that we're trying to build out in ocean exploration and engage communities that maybe never even knew there was an ocean exploration program? Take a look at some of the things that are going on outside of the federal government in the spirit of new risk, high payoff. And it's hard to overestimate the impact of disruptive technologies, which is in itself a high risk, high payoff concept. Examples are on the slide here. Certainly the work that Saildrone has done is one example. We're partnering with our colleagues at BOEM, with the Cooperative Institute, with UNH, the NOAA program with MBARI, to test the larger Saildrone, the 72-foot autonomous vessel on a mission to the Aleutian Island chain that's going to be critical for gathering exploration data. This is novel in terms of the platform that's being used, novel in terms of the concept of operations. It is truly disruptive. I've been around the business long enough to see what happened with companies like Liquid Robotics, OpenROV. These are disruptive. We should be encouraging that. What's the role for the federal agencies in encouraging that kind of development of disruptive technologies? We put a Saildrone into Hurricane Sam a few years ago. When I was last at NOAA, we talked about one of the problems with hurricane forecasting is that we couldn't get data down to the surface of the ocean. Actually, we did that once, many years ago. We launched a drone out of one of our P3s to get a vertical profile of temperature. We got a vertical profile of temperature till the thing lost power. And then the last bit of data we got was sea surface temperature from the drone. Not particularly effective way of getting profiles of temperature. Why not start using things like sail drone? But you know, the point about sail drone is just one example, is in part the technology, but it's also the concept of operations. It's data as a service. I was at Oceanology International in London last week. Of the 400 plus exhibitors, I would say 10% of them were working a data as a service business model. I would say 50% were selling hardware. Then the remaining 40% didn't know whether to sell hardware or data as a service. That's a disruptive kind of thinking. How can we, in our efforts in ocean exploration, foster, embrace, encourage this kind of innovation through disruptive technology? Sail drone's not the first disruptive technology we've seen in ocean exploration. eDNA is another example of a disruptive piece of technology, in that case developed by a lot of our colleagues. We're now looking at how we can use eDNA in fisheries in ways that we've never used it before. AI, machine learning, quantum computing, extraordinary list of capabilities out there. What does AUV coordination look like in the future? We've spent a lot of time thinking about swarm technology. We've got leaders in this community right here. I think every time I see Bob Ballard, we talk about the next version of swarm smart adaptive sampling. What about residence sampling? The military is doing this. They're thinking about pre-placing technologies to support our national security mission. I would argue climate change is as big an existential threat as national security is. So why aren't we pre-positioning and developing resident sampling technologies for uncrewed systems in an adaptive sampling manner in the same way that we're thinking about doing that in national security? Fully integrated with our modeling capability, with our satellites, a total Earth system approach. It's going to be a critical concept, a critical turning point for us, I believe, when we start building some of these new technologies into our capabilities. Compressive sensing. Compressive sensing is something that's used in imaging right now extensively. Are we using compressive sensing to the extent we should for our sampling capabilities, for our imaging capabilities, for our bathymetric and hydrographic observations? I'd be remiss, of course, if I didn't take just a few minutes and talk about additional capabilities. This was just a placeholder here to show you some of the data we got from the sail drone that was put in Hurricane Sam. For those of you who have spent some time at sea, the picture on the right should make you just a bit queasy with 40-foot waves and Cat 4 hurricane. We don't tend to put our research vessels or our airplanes into those situations. In that case, we were collecting data the whole time from sail drone. It's a very different sort of concept. Anyway, it was a little bit of eye candy I want to make sure to share with you. I do want to take just a minute and talk a little bit about what's going on with respect to our efforts to map the US EEZ, more than 3.4 million square nautical miles of ocean in the US EEZ, and the bottom line is only about 48% has been mapped to modern standards. As you all know, we have the responsibility at NOAA to map the EEZ to the best of our capability, and I'm really proud that NOAA's ocean exploration program achieved a major milestone in contributing to that responsibility. I'm going to mix units on you here because it sounds better when I use square kilometers. So we just completed the 2 million square kilometers mark with Oceanic mapped imagery. That's 770,000 square miles for those of you who are doing the confusion. An extraordinary accomplishment for the program. All of which is part, of course, of the national strategy for mapping, exploring and characterizing the US EEZ, NOMEC, as it's called, some authors of which are sitting here in the audience with us. This is truly a key issue, a key capability for us. It's something of an all hands on deck effort between the Ocean Exploration Program, the National Ocean Service, our colleagues overseas, the IHO, the IOC, the whole alphabet soup. And I am truly delighted to share that one of the first major deliverables under the NOMEC strategy, which is called the Strategic Priorities for Ocean Exploration and Characterization Report, will be out very soon. It's going through the final stages of approval. We, of course, put out the Federal Register notice that it would be out soon, just a few days ago. And now, of course, the goal of this particular forum is to focus on the future of exploration and what it looks like. And I actually think that this forum is in itself an example of how I see the future of ocean exploration, much more aggressively developing new partnerships. There are people here representing organizations that didn't even exist when we started doing these fora many years ago. Public partnerships, private partnerships, philanthropy. How can we in the federal sector work better with the partners at the table? Alan Leonardi and I represent a very novel approach that was taken. It's almost 20 years ago now, Alan, I think 15 years ago or so. When some of you may remember when Google first announced they were going to put out Google Earth, it was none other than Sylvia Earle who took a look at it. And for those of you who started playing with Google Earth when it first came out, if you put your cursor over any blue part of the world, you got an error message which said, negative altitude cannot be calculated. And so it was Sylvia who first said, it's not Google Earth, it's Google Dirt. And the folks at Google said, well, how do we fix that? And it was pretty clear there were a number of workshops. Some folks here in the room were at those workshops. And it was pretty clear that we at NOAA needed help. We had holdings, not us alone, but our friends at Navy, Scripps and other places had data holdings, hydrographic data holdings, bathymetric surveys. That really need to be incorporated in there. They were publicly available, but nobody really knew how to access it. Alan was embedded at Google for several months. I remember, I was the head of OAR then. I remember thinking, this is the only way we're going to do this. We could sign a CRADA or an MOU, but it's really about the people. And I've got to tell you, if Alan hadn't been there, we'd probably still be trying to get those data into Google Earth, Google Ocean. And so the lesson it taught me was there's always a way and people are the solution. So how can we use the people sitting in this audience, the people sitting at NOAA in new and creative ways in partnerships? My commitment to you is, hey, I'm the NOAA administrator. I ought to be able to write the variances or the allowances for people to be embedded, to share expertise, and I'm committed to making that happen because I think that's the key to how to make these partnerships work. The other thing I'm trying to do in my capacity as NOAA administrator is position the agency, the agenda, the capabilities like we've got with Oceanic, the capabilities we've got with the Ocean Exploration Program in the light that they deserve to be put in the context of the greater issues that the globe is dealing with, like climate change. So I and our agency fought hard to make sure that NOAA was at COP26. Hadn't happened before. That NOAA is there representing the government of the United States in Palau in a few weeks at the Our Ocean Conference, and that NOAA and all of our equities are representing the United States at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon in June. In my capacity there, I fully intend to take these equities, these capabilities, the knowledge and the data that you all are developing, that the program is developing, and make sure that the relevance of those products and services are made abundantly clear to the global community. All of that's going to help us at NOAA develop what we're calling a climate-ready nation, where not only do we understand what's going to happen with respect to changes, but we're actually prospering and benefiting from understanding those changes. That's heresy. It's more than just digging your heels in and saying we're going to deal with the consequences of climate change. We're actually going to prosper and benefit from what we learn about the ocean, from what we learn about climate change and what it's doing to the ocean. So hopefully I've been able to give you a little bit of a quick story of what's going on in my head and share with you what I see as some of the key opportunities for us at NOAA writ large with respect to ocean sciences and ocean technology, a little bit more specifically, and with respect to the role that ocean exploration can play even more specifically. I cannot tell you how optimistic I am about this. I mean, I came out of retirement, as Alan pointed out. I've now retired twice from NOAA. And when I was given this opportunity, and I saw what this administration was doing, I'm not going to get all political on you, but I will say that I decided I'd had the benefit of working in Washington for 35 years. Looks like there's a real motivation to do some things and do them right. I really felt that a lot of politically charged dialogue with respect to climate and climate change was simmering, and now people wanted to get to what do we do to fix it. I also felt that the capabilities in ocean science and technology were such that things like the new blue economy are a reality, and we could build out what I believe is a $100 billion ocean and climate services enterprise. And if we do that, it will be a rising tide that floats all boats. So thank you for the opportunity to come share with you some of my perspectives on not just what will be done in the future, but how we'll do it, and hopefully infuse you all with a little bit of the enthusiasm that I've got for where we're going. And with that, thank you. I'd be glad to take any questions that you've got. Am I moderating my own questions, Alan? That could be a dangerous thing.
Well, thank you, Rick. Obviously, this is our time right now for folks who have questions. Don't be bashful. Rick is always happy to answer questions. And I know, Dan, you're going to try to intersperse some questions from the virtual audience as well as that the audience that is here. So I see we have one person right away in the back that already has a mic in hand.
Thanks for that great NOAA talk. Very inspiring. And I hope we get the 100 billion to launch all kinds of stuff. So I have.
Thank you. Can you introduce you and all the questioners, please introduce
Yeah, I'm
yourself.
sorry.
Thank you.
We had met earlier. So George Cummings, I'm part of Mission Blue. I'm also one of the 1,500 UN Ocean Ambassadors. It's not about me. It's about the ocean. That's why we're all here. But so that's my little intro. Live here in Austin, Texas. So in my group in this pilot I've got with 25 NGOs and 100 projects, we've got 3 or 4 guys who've got some IP, sail drone-like things, sensor stuff. What is the best way for us to get all the sensor guys on one page so we're not duplicating and we leverage and amplify and accelerate getting the sensors we all need miniaturized, cost adjusted, so that we can really start deploying and collecting the data in so many places that are gaps now?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is I don't want you all on one page. I think that's part of the problem is when we're all on one page, then we all think alike. And I'd give a talk sometimes where I show some of what I consider some of the most influential players in our game, and they are people who have come into this community from well outside, who have thought about how we make observations differently. So I'm going to bend your question around a little bit and say, where is the place where that dialogue can happen? And I would argue this forum, obviously, on a somewhat regular basis is part of it, but also there's a number of professional societies that I think are leaning forward pretty hard on this. Professional societies and professional conferences. The Marine Technology Society is one. The Society for Underwater Technology is another. Oceanology International, both the one that happens in the UK and the ones that are happening elsewhere in the world. Those are the places where I see that kind of discussion happening, as I did last week when I walked the floor of the Oceanology International Conference. You see a different sort of mindset. And even this concept of data as a service was sort of rippling through the exhibition floor, stimulating people to think differently about how to do this. Thank you for the question. Marine Technology Society and Oceanology International And I said another one, I can't remember, but AGU, this forum here would be the other one. Yeah. Society for Underwater Technology. That was the other one. Sorry. Yes. Bright lights, big city. Sorry, can't see.
Thank you very much, Rick. Dennis Hansel from the University of Miami. I'm here representing UNOLS, I believe. And I think, Rick, you were involved with JGOFS back in the day. So I think we met each other a long time ago.
We did.
So, Rick, what is your, I'm new to this. This is my first time to this community. And so I'm still trying to understand, what is ocean exploration? Because I don't know people in this room. If I was at my meetings, there'd be a room full of people who are research scientists from the Ocean Science Committee. I'm involved with US Ghost Ship, the time series programs, all that kind of research that you're very familiar with. What is ocean exploration from NOAA's perspective?
So, and I'm going to take a little bit of a pun. I'm happy to give you my take, but I actually would strongly recommend take a look at the, I'm going to get the title wrong, but the President's Commission on Ocean Exploration, several of the people in the room. Bob, what was that, 1998? Is that about right?
It came right after the President's Panel for Ocean Exploration.
Right. So if you take a look at that, there's a really, really good definition of ocean exploration. I can tell you it's basically the unfettered discovery and search for new knowledge, new features, new phenomena in the ocean, which is a pretty broad definition, but I like to use that sort of thinking because a lot of people believe it's inherently geographic in nature, and obviously a lot of it is, but there's also an element to discovering new processes and new features that may not be specific to particular geographies. But if you take a look at that document from 24 years ago, I think you'll find it was really very well thought out in terms of its definition. Thank you. And good to see you again, Dennis.
So we actually have a question from a virtual attendee, Chris Sholin. Chris, please turn on your camera and your mic and introduce yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Rick, it's Chris Sholin here. Pleasure to see you all virtually, sadly, but from Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And Rick, as you know, one of the challenges I think that we have in the scientific technology development community is really understanding the end user's requirements and pulling that information into the design process so that we facilitate a much quicker transition from the research to operations. And so my question is, as we look forward, and there clearly many organizations would welcome more involvement from government agencies in helping to define those requirements. Do you foresee embedding NOAA personnel, for example, in private institutions or academic institutions where they're not just there to, to give a seminar or attend a meeting, but they actually might spend months and participate in the development of something, a true co-production? Just curious about your thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, short answer to your question, Chris, is yes, I do see that, which is why I brought up the example of embedding personnel. I believe, it's interesting, most people who go to work at the National Science Foundation, most of our academic colleagues do it under something called an IPA, an Intergovernmental Personnel Act, which allows people to maintain their academic affiliation, go work for NSF for a few years. We use it at NOAA. I used it at Navy when I was there. You can actually do reverse IPAs where the federal agency person can go work in academia or in industry. I'm looking at trying to develop more opportunities, fellowships, internships, that kind of thing for the federal folks to do what you're talking about. But there's another aspect to your question, Chris, and that is, where is that definition of requirements coming from? Again, when I worked at Navy, requirements was what we adhered to. You didn't spend a penny, you didn't hire a person until you could attribute it to a validated requirement. Well, the good news is that there are any number of strategic developments going on. One of the most important, I think, we have the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which is requiring a whole series of plans that we can say represent requirements. There's a high-level ocean panel that was started by Norway and Palau. The United States is now a member of that panel. One of the requirements for being a member of the panel is that you are committed to developing a plan for sustainable ocean, sustainable economically, environmentally, socially, et cetera. And so that's coming out too. So we're going to have a whole series of well-documented statements of what the requirements are. And I actually believe we do have the tools to get people cross-fertilized, if you will. So it's my intent to try to make that happen. And yeah, and thanks for calling that out, Chris, because that's a very important aspect of getting this done. It can't just be about writing grants, sending money, writing checks, or signing cooperative agreements. There's got to be a personal element to that, if you will. Thank you.
Hello, Administrator Spinrad. Thank you for a lovely talk. My name is Paula Bontempi. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Oceanography at University of Rhode Island. And first of all, I want to thank you for hitting on a couple of thematic areas that I think as feds, and I call myself a recovering fed in the past, that we sort of danced around, right? Which is highlighting the role of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's not about what we can do for those communities, but what we can accomplish together once we have a shared understanding. My question is, my interest was piqued by your comment about the discussion at Oceanology International about sort of monetizing or making data a commodity, so to speak, by some of the companies that you saw there. And I wondered if you could comment on how you see that unfolding in the US, partnerships among industry and academia, philanthropy, and the government. Because one question I get at the highest echelons of state government in Rhode Island is, how can we monetize what you're doing here? Which is a complex question with federal funding.
Absolutely. It's good to see you, Paul. And we miss you in DC, I'll tell you that. So I'll tell you a very quick story, and it involves a fellow named Mitch Roffer, whom some of you may know. Mitch, many years ago, decided that he was going to take publicly available data, use a proprietary model to forecast. I think his first product was a sea surface temperature product, specifically tied to the needs of the recreational sport fishing tournament business, a pretty good sized business. And he was able to develop a good enough product. Many of the species in recreational sport fishing are temperature sensitive. And so if you have a really good sea surface temperature forecast, you might know where to go to get some of these particular species. And it was the kernel of a concept for monetizing publicly available data with a value added product. And that was the proprietary model. So if you take that and now put it on steroids and think in terms of the climate arena, I've had, by last count, about 160 meetings since I started in June with various different groups who are looking at monetizing, mostly for the climate arena. You know, companies or philanthropic organizations that want to develop a specific product to help the insurance industry understand their climate risk, their transition risk associated with investment in particular areas. They can't do that without understanding the ocean better. And so that's the monetizing part of it. It's really taking the data, and it's more than just spewing out volumes of data and saying, here, there you go. Here's a flat file with all the sea surface temperatures or currents or altimetry, but rather interpreting it and then providing the customized, tailored product, which, oh, by the way, the public sector will never do. And so the lesson has been learned in commercial weather, but it's been learned the hard way with a lot of litigation and bad feelings and distrust between specifically the Weather Service and the commercial weather enterprise. Can we learn from that, do better, and build out this capability? And it's mostly around climate services. But again, I would argue you can't do climate services without the ocean component. So that's the idea. And I'd love to follow up offline, especially, as I said, given the history that URI had in some of the early thinking on this. So thank you.
Me?
Howdy.
Hello? Testing. All right. Howdy. My name is Armand Alex. I'm on the board of directors for Earth Echo International, founded by Philippe Cousteau Jr., as well as our Youth Leadership Council, but I'm present here today as the director of youth engagement for the Gulf Reach Institute. And you'll have to forgive me if I had missed this earlier, but my question is centered around youth engagement. So NOAA just recently held the virtual town hall for America the Beautiful initiative, about 18 states. We had some young, amazing representatives of Earth Echo International and its Youth Action Network asked you questions specifically about 30 by 30. more specifically, I think my question is, what is NOAA doing to continue youth engagement? Because I will say arguably that we understand that the majority or a big part of a climate-ready nation came from the fight and advocacy young people have done for climate change and their local communities. And a lot of local communities, that work is being funneled and fueled by young people. So what is NOAA doing to continue that momentum that young people have started to really build a climate-ready nation?
I love that. Thank you. As you know, I was a participant in the Earth Echo session 3-4 weeks ago, I think, on Saturday. A session that was supposed to go for an hour and a half. We went for over 2 hours, I think. I'll also share with you, I know Larry Mager's here in the audience, and Larry chairs the U.S. Committee on the UN Decade. And when I was Larry's vice chair on that, we invited the youth, I'm going to get the name wrong, but the Youth Advisory Council for the UN Decade to come join us in both of those cases and many others I've been involved with. I can tell you I've never seen such a well-organized set of thoughts, perspectives, and comments as I did from those youth around the world who are so passionate and engaged on these issues, rightfully so, since the youth are the ones who are inheriting all of these issues. So the first part of my answer is I'm gonna make time and make sure I am available to have those discussions at every opportunity. You have my commitment to continue doing that. I'm also seriously considering whether we ought to actually establish a youth engagement senior advisor position, as we have done for tribal liaisons in NOAA. So we've hired an individual to serve in that capacity. The other part, the downside of doing that, incidentally, is whenever you do something like that, a lot of times people say, oh, good, I don't have to worry about it because Mary or Charlie or whoever it is who is that liaison has that responsibility. So I want to make sure if I do that, it's not a way of saying just park all the youth engagement over in that office, but that it becomes a way of instilling throughout the rest of the organization the need to have those dialogues. We have existing programs, educational programs. We have existing programs like Sea Grant, which get involved in a variety of different levels of engagement. We've got the Holling Scholars, we've got the EPP MSI Educational Partnership Program. So we've got a number of ways of engaging with you, but not in the same sense as groups like Earth Echo, for example, where it's a sort of a formal relationship. So I can't say here's the 5 things we're doing beyond what I've just said, except I hope I can convey to you that I take very seriously and recognize the value of that engagement for its understanding that youth bring to the dialogue, but also recognizing that these are the people that are going to have my job in a few years. And I'd much rather be in a place where they're aware of what NOAA can do and should do and may actually be influencing it. So I'm committed to engaging myself. I'm committed to using the programs we've got. And I'm thinking seriously about actually establishing a formal position to serve in that capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spinrad. Unfortunately, this brings us to the end of this session, but if you will all please join me in thanking Dr. Spinrad for spending. Well, let me just say first, you heard it here, he's committed. So he isn't being committed, let's be clear. I want to add a little anecdote to Rick's great story about my being embedded in Google. And that anecdote is this, is that what most don't realize is that after Rick had the audacity to send somebody to Google for a half a year, and I thank my wife for letting me go, the Department of Commerce said, wait, how did that happen? Any assignment outside of the agency from here on forward has to be approved by the Department of Commerce. So what was entrepreneurial led to more bureaucracy. And I think really the point here is that just because it has never been done doesn't mean it can't be done. And I think that that's part of what we're all about here in the ocean exploration world. And I welcome the high risk, high reward tolerance that you're bringing to the agency. So thank you, Rick.